Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Today marks number 300 of these videos. I've been doing this for almost 4 years, and in that time there are now 300 full-length How I Paint Things guides. So today I wanted to do something just for me. What I've got here is one of the doctors, the fourth doctor, Tom Baker, and I'm gonna start a fight by saying the best doctor. He's the fella that I grew up with. When I was a little fella, he was on the TV Friday nights on the wee TV that sat on the kitchen table while I'd have eggs and chips with my grandparents. So he's always the fella that's going to stand out most from my childhood. The miniature itself comes from Warlord Games, and I'll make sure that there are a couple of links in the description so you can go pick these up. And today I'm really just, like I said, painting for myself and enjoying the process and doing something totally out of left field. So, as always, the paints will be listed in the description below. Let's get started. Just before we get to the painting, it's worth a quick note on the material itself that this is made from, because it's that funky, not quite plastic stuff, which means scraping mold lines, it doesn't really work like it normally would. You're going to need a sharp knife, and basically you're carving them off. It does make things a little bit fussy. I haven't done a great deal because I didn't really want to scrape off any detail by accident. The one part that I've cleaned up really was the side of his hat here. The rest of it, to my surprise, doesn't really need a huge amount of work. But there are one or two visible mold lines. I'm not too fussed. It's not really going to hurt the overall appearance. And once he is cleaned up, I've chosen to hit him with a primer spray of Zandri dust. Anything sort of middling beige, maybe even a grey, will work perfectly well here. Just nothing too dark. It'll make it a little bit more difficult to apply the colours we're going to use. So, same as with most human miniatures, we'll start by base coating his skin. Reason being, it's going to be the area that will most likely mess up as we go. So we'll start here. Just a couple of layers of Bugman's Glow is where we're going to start from. I thought about whether or not I was going to paint the eyes on him, and to be quite honest, the way this is sculpted, it's a little more realistic, so his eyes are quite deep set. There isn't really a huge amount of detail there, so I am going to skip it and just leave that little recess to do the work for me. But if you wanted to, I have done a video on painting eyes the easy way fairly recently, so you could give it a shot. I think the miniature's going to look fine without. Now the next layer up here is going to be his waistcoat, and costume design of the 70s, well, they made some brave choices. I'm not going to be strictly accurate at all stages. I'm really going for an impressionist doctor, which I guess is kind of appropriate. With some Morghast bone here, what I'm doing is laying down yellow but kind of not, which I think is going to best help me sketch out the idea of the waistcoat. Right, 2 coats later, we've got that wonderful 70s yellow going for us. And what I'm going to do now is to apply the checked pattern. Now, if we use a straight black, because the threads on the doctor's coat are actually black for the checks, it's going to look super dark and it will look much more solid than I would like. So what I'm going to use instead here is Garaghak Sewer, which is quite a dark brown by comparison. And remember that we are going to shade over the top of this as well. So what I'm going to do first of all is tip him sideways and start just by picking an area roughly middle of his chest, and we'll put down a line and another line, and you can use the buttons to help you space these out. Don't worry if they're not perfectly aligned. And a common question is how to deal with painting straight lines. And the short answer, less paint on your brush. You know, if you're losing control of it, if you're getting big, thick lines, you've got too much paint on your brush. Just slow down, rinse it off, and start over. So we'll do the other side from the opposite direction, and if they join up, cool, they probably should. I notice a couple of them are a little lopsided, so I'm going to go back in with some fresh Morghast bone and erase them. And I'm going to keep doing these little lines until I get them as straight as I want. Okay, so that's the horizontal lines done. Now we can do the vertical lines. Now, on the costume, these are a little bit lighter. So what I've done is mixed in some contrast medium, roughly half and half. It's not going to matter too much if it's not perfect. I just want this to be a little lighter. Oh my goodness. Same procedure, just pick a point and start lightly drawing your brush and hoping. Now, even when you've got the checks the way that you would like, it's still going to look super messy off to the sides because we still have the jacket to base coat. Now, technically, there is also red stripes on this waistcoat, but I value what little of my sanity remains, so I'm going to skip those. There's going to be quite a lot of red around the miniature anyway. With some Dawnstone now, I'm going to paint in his trousers. Being quite careful when I come near that bleeding waistcoat. But otherwise, this should be fairly easy to apply. You will need to apply a couple of coats of that to get a solid color, but honestly, after having done the waistcoat, you're not going to notice. We'll move on at last to his jacket. And here, obviously, he wears so many different colors over the course of his run as the Doctor, but I always liked that reddish starter. So what I've got, this is Cavalry Brown from Vallejo. And you'll see, oh, it's a wonderful reddish brown color. Covers beautifully. Now, if you want something like this from the Citadel range, you could use Doombull Brown, though that is a little bit darker than this. Obviously, you can use what you would like for the Doctor's jacket. Of course, the man was dressed like he walked through curtains regularly, so there's not really a wrong answer here. Now, finally, it looks like we're getting somewhere, but there is a stage I should have done earlier, which is to paint in his sleeves. Honestly, a little bit of off-white before having painted in his jacket would have made this much easier. If I do make a mistake here, I can just go back to the base coat of either color and tidy up. Now, at last, we're going to paint in this scarf. And to start off with, for that beigey sort of knitted color, I've got Rakarth Flesh. I'm going to paint in the whole thing with this because it's going to give us a really nice base coat for some of the lighter colors we'll use. And as you'll see, covers very well. This gives us a chance to tidy up any of the unkempt edges we have. Okay, with this scarf base coated, what I'm going to do now is just pick a selection of colors. This is going to be really weird. I'm not going to do this on camera because the actual order and where each color is and how much of it there is, it changes from season to scarf and what have you. It's not so important that things are in the correct place as much as they give the right impression. So I'm going to list these in the description and I'll put them in a little section that says scarf, but I suggest use whatever you think is going to look good. I'm going to go slightly brighter with each of them than I need to because I want to shade this and not have to highlight. So let's come back once I've spent some time on this scarf. From your perspective, that's going to jump from a mostly grey thing to a riot of colour, but that was quite a lot of painting. What I'd suggest is when it comes to the lighter colours, your lighter patches should be bigger than your darker colours. You don't want them to overpower things, basically. Now I'm going to paint with some Evil Sunz Scarlet, his cravat, and I might do this off screen just so I got a little bit more control. Oh, we can get in there. And from here, there's really only a couple of colours remaining. We'll start with some Mournfang brown on his shoes, nice and easy. Tom Baker's hair and his hat were actually very similar colours, but what I'm going to do is use Dryad bark to paint in his hair, and then a little bit of Catachan flesh to paint in his hat. Now, theoretically, you could paint both of these the same color, particularly with this miniature having the hat away from his head. It will not be so visible if they're the same color, but I want just a little bit of variety there. Now, the last thing I'm going to do for this fella is to go ahead and pop a little bit of black on the buttons of his waistcoat, and then we can get ready to shade him. Now, once everything's dried, you can go back and do any last minute tidy up that you need to. What I've got here is a little pot I've made up. This is half and half Agrax Earthshade and Lamian Medium because I don't want it to stain. I don't want it to be very dark. Now, this is the old Agrax Earthshade, so you could just as easily use the new stuff. I don't know. This is what works for me, and when I run out of it, I will eventually have to learn how the new stuff works. But all we'll do is just apply relatively thin layer of this, making sure that we are aiming for any recesses so that there's a nice edge on everything. And then we'll leave them to dry somewhere sunny. Give it about half an hour, gently tap the camera, very important, and we'll have a look at what that looks like when that's dry. So now we've got plenty of shading. His scarf in particular looks a little more reasonable, and yeah, that's looking pretty cool. But I reckon his skin is way dark compared to what I would like it to be when we finish. So same as always, we're going to start there to highlight. So what I've got is Cadian flesh tone, and we're going to go over most of his skin again, leaving just a little bit of that shaded Bugman's glow in the recesses. So take your time with this. You really do just want to leave the very corners. Most of his skin is going to be Cadian flesh tone. Now we're getting somewhere, but something I've noticed now with this miniature is that he doesn't actually have much in the way of facial detail. He's not got a lip, and he's starting to look a little more like Odo. So instead of chasing Quark around the promenade with a sonic screwdriver, I've gone back to some Bugman's glow. And what I'm going to do is use this. I tend to paint the lip in with a little bit of my base color. So let's see if I can just create one. Now that's not perfect yet, but it is better, and I'll take that. What I've got next is some Kislev flesh, and we're going to paint in stuff like his nose, his cheekbones, his brows, and we'll do a few little bits on the back of his fingers as well. So if you're ever lost for where to highlight with this, I tend to find just a line across the cheeks is ordinarily plenty. But if you want to exaggerate some of these details a little more, you just stretch the lines out. Now that looks a little more familiar. What we'll move on to now is highlighting his coat, and luckily we don't have to mix anything for this either. Tuscarora fur, which is a fun one to try and say very quickly. Tusker fur, it never really quite comes out right. Anyhow, it is the perfect highlight for this color here on his jacket. So take your time and do as much or as little of this as you like. Just small straight lines, and remember as always, just a little bit of paint on your brush at a time will help you keep control of what you're doing. Now at the moment that will be a little difficult to see. It will show up much better in person, and once we've varnished that, that's going to come together much more nicely. But now we're going to do the unthinkable. You could skip this stage if you like yourself, but I don't know what's possessed me here. What I've got on my little palette behind me is a whole bunch of dots of ivory. Now, that's a color from Vallejo. You could just as easily use Screaming Skull if you want to stick to Citadel. What I am going to do is mix up a little dot, half and half, of every single one of the colors I used for the scarf so far, and go back and just highlight in the edges with that color. That might be a little too much ivory. Oh my goodness. Well, this is going to be fun one way or the other. If you've got a real steady hand, what you can do is paint in some little scratchy lines and help get some of that woolly texture in there. So yeah, it looks really cool. I'm going to do it to all of the scarf colors. So all of those that are listed in the description, just half and half with a little bit of ivory and some thin lines. Away we go. All right, so a couple of thoughts on that one. First off, take your time with it, and remember, once you've finished it, it's finished forever. So enjoy the painting. I know that'll sound crazy when you're actually doing it, because my goodness. And if you do have any mistakes that pop up which you're not happy with, just go back to your base color and you can sort of paint those out. What I've got now is a little old dry brush and some Steel Legion Drab just worked into that. I'm going to lightly flick along the top of his head just to pick out some of that detail. Now we'll do the same thing with some Mournfang brown and just lightly catch the edge of his hat. And then finally, the last thing I'm going to do is use some Administratum Grey, and I'm going to highlight his trousers. Now from here, what I'm going to need to do is choose what I want to do with the base. And I don't want to add sand or what have you. What I'm thinking is just to paint it a simple color so that it works for sort of board game. So I'm going to pick something. It'll be listed in the description, same as everything else. And let's get a look at the Doctor once I am all finished. And so, there at last, the Doctor is complete. Now ultimately I decided to go for Celestra Grey on the floor because I figured that off-white kind of blue, that's very 70s. So this was a little more work than I'd expected, probably a lot more actually, and parts of it genuinely weren't very much fun to do. But in the end, what I've got is something that I can be proud of. I'm quite happy with that result. And if there happens to be a thinly veiled metaphor there for anything else, I'm sure I can't imagine what I might be talking about. But all that's left to do is to say thank you, and very genuinely to everybody who has watched these things, commented, subscribed, shared them with folks that might need them. You are the folks who are keeping me going, who keep me doing this because I do still enjoy it. As well, to everybody at any point who's been involved with helping behind the scenes to make these things happen, whether it be with donations of, cash donations, Patreon backers, folks from companies that have sent me stuff to play around with on the channel. It really is what makes this happen. So if you enjoy what I'm doing and, you've ever wondered why it is I'm still doing it after 4 years, you've got all of those folks to thank as well. So I'm going to sign off a little differently to how I normally would. Just again, thank you very much. And I really do hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.